Scholars agree that Mark was written sometime after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, near the end of the first Jewish-Roman wars. It is my contention that Mark was written by Flavius Josephus as a sort of propaganda in order to make the warring Jewish sects accept Roman rule. The Gospel of Mark was the original story of a heroic, demon-casting-out Son of Man who spoke of reverence to Roman authority. In Mark's Gospel, Jesus keeps his true identity a secret when he is referred to as the Christ, Messiah, and admonishes those who call him the Messiah and requests that they keep this knowledge a secret. The other Gospels of Matthew, Luke, and John are like fan fiction, or even can be compared to sequels which lay out more detail than Mark does. We first see Jesus in Mark's Gospel in the desert being baptized by John the Baptist. There is no virgin birth, no true connection to the house of David that would make Jesus the promised Messiah. Only later on in Matthew or Luke do we learn these details. In John, Jesus is not only the Messiah, but he is God in the flesh. It appears that the people who wrote Matthew, Luke, and John were not satisfied with Mark's original story and needed to establish more connections from Jesus to the Old Testament prophecies of the coming Messiah. It's the same today when a popular movie comes out and fans need more detail and later invent this detail in elaborate fan fictions and speculation. But to get to the real reason why Mark was written, we have to take a look at its author, who I believe to be Flavius Josephus. Flavius Josephus, most Christians and historians today will be very familiar with this writer. He was a first-century historian who was born in Jerusalem to a father of priestly descent and a mother who claimed royal ancestry. Initially, Josephus fought against the Romans during the First Jewish War as head of a Jewish force in Galilee, until surrendering in 67 to Roman forces led by Vespasian. Josephus was a smart man, and when he was being led to his death as a traitor to Caesar, Josephus claimed that the Jewish Masonic prophecies that initiated the wars made reference to Vespasian becoming emperor of Rome. Vespasian liked this ideal very much because he understood that the Jewish people were a very superstitious lot, and if he could place himself in their prophecies, they might accept him as their ruler. In 69, Vespasian did become emperor, and he believed Josephus to be a prophet himself, and so he granted him his freedom and even gave him his family's name of Flavius. Josephus then fully defected to the Roman side and became an advisor and translator and friend to Vespasian's son Titus. Josephus was present at the destruction of the Second Temple all the way till the end of the war with Masada. He went on to write important works entitled The Jewish Wars and The Antiquities of the Jews. I believe that it was also during this time that he was asked to write a propagandist book aimed at Jewish religious beliefs in order to get the Jews to accept Roman rule. This book would later be known as the Gospel of Mark. Josephus played on the stories of the Jewish people and the histories of the early century desert preachers like John the Baptist. It is possible that Jesus the man was based on an amalgamation of many of these early century prophets and preachers. The name Jesus itself means to rescue in Greek, and Josephus used this name in order to point the Jews to Rome as their rescuers from decades of war. Josephus had to make the Jesus man a heroic figure with magical powers, and that is why Mark's Gospel shows a Jesus figure who never refers to himself as God, for the Roman Caesars were believed to be gods. But Jesus is a humble man with amazing powers and the ability to cast out demons, heal the sick, and raise the dead. Throughout Mark's Gospel, Jesus casts doubt on the authority of the religious power base in Jerusalem. He works on the Sabbath, dines with prostitutes and tax collectors, thus subverting the rule of the Sadducees. But he always tells his followers to submit to Roman authority. When tested in the temple about paying taxes, Jesus famously says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's." This simple reference to Caesar hinted at a wider submission to Roman authority over Jewish religious authority. Since this propagandist gospel was written long after the first Jewish-Roman wars, the prophecies it mentions were easily fulfillable. Jesus speaks of the destruction of the temple, which had already occurred by the time Mark was written. And Jesus also softens this defeat for the Jewish people by stating that the destruction of the temple means very little, because the temple had become a den of vipers, because of his acts against the money changers. By softening the destruction of the temple, showing that it was meant to be destroyed because of God's anger towards the Jewish leadership, it forced the Jewish people to blame their own religious leaders instead of the Roman powers. When Jesus speaks of this generation not passing away until the coming of the Son of Man, this was a subtle reference to the coming of Flavius Titus, who sacked Rome and then ended the war with Masada in 73. The Gospel of Mark looks to light the Roman authority as saviors and the Jewish religious leadership as the cause of all the Jewish people's pain and misery. Even the story of Jesus entering Jerusalem riding a donkey was a reference to Titus entering Jerusalem after it was sacked during the war. Throughout the Gospel of Mark, it is the Jewish religious leaders who look to arrest and kill Jesus, not the Roman authority. After the Last Supper and Jesus retreats to the Garden of Gethsemane, he prays saying, "The spirit is strong, but the flesh is weak," which is a reference to those Jews in Masada who committed suicide rather than surrender to Rome. Here Jesus accepts his fate, as did the Jews held up in Masada, who then allowed themselves to die in order to bring peace and end the war. Jesus being arrested by the temple guards and brought before the Sadducees is Josephus' way of laying blame at the foot of the religious ruling class for the Masada deaths and war, and thus removing blame from the Romans. It had been the ruling religious class that had hyped up the people that caused the war, but if they would have just submitted to Rome, all would have been peaceful. In Mark's gospel, it is the Sadducees that call for Jesus' blood, and when he is brought before Pilate, Pilate finds no fault in him and wishes to set him free. The Jewish mob then calls for him to be crucified. Still, Pilate tries to show mercy and brings forth Barabbas for the people to choose, and they choose Barabbas over Jesus. Here, Josephus is placing the full blame of Jesus' death on the Jewish religious leadership. Even when Jesus is on the cross, it is the Roman soldiers and not the Jews who see him as the Messiah. Jesus dies and Pilate gives his body over and he is placed in the burial chamber. The Gospel of Mark ends with the women going to the tomb only to find the rock rolled away and a man telling them that Jesus has risen. The women go away in fear, telling no one. The later parts of Mark about Jesus appearing to his followers were added later, and this is agreed upon by most religious scholars. What Joseph constructed was a perfect piece of propaganda that laid the blame of the wars at the feet of the Jewish religious leadership and made the Romans out to be the saviors of the Jewish people. Mark's Jesus was a humble Messiah who told his followers to submit to Roman rule and flout Jewish religious authority. The later Gospels of Matthew, Luke, and John would be written to try to fill in some of the gaps that Mark left out. The story of Jesus as a warrior king would take on a life of its own, and in the year 337, Flavius Constantine would become the first Holy Roman Emperor converting to Christianity. The Flavians, who had first created a propagandist work to get the Jewish people to submit to their rule, would later make their own creation the religion of the Roman Empire. Because of this, Christianity would spread throughout the world, not because of it being a true account of God, but because of the far-reaching rule of the Roman Empire.